So let me welcome you to the David S. Saurman Provocative Lecture. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Justin Reitz, and I'm an assistant professor here in the econ department. Before I go any further, I ask everyone to turn off your electronic devices, tablets, phones, mainly phones. Make sure at least that they're on silent. It would be much appreciated. Also, please join us following the lecture at Flames Eatery on the corner of 4th Street in San Fernando for the meeting of the Barstool Economists. This is a virtual group of individuals who share economic ideas on the web. It is open to anyone who would like to join us. We consider everyone a potential member, so everyone please come. The David Saurman Provocative Lecture Series started 18 years ago to foster our vision of higher education, challenging ideas, and the development of critical thinking in an environment of respectful intellectual discussion. Our speaker tonight is Howard Root. Started his career as a corporate lawyer, but soon turned into an entrepreneur and never looked back. He founded the Minnesota medical device company Vascular Solutions in 1997 and continued to run it for 20 years, inventing and launching over 100 new cardiovascular devices and creating over 650 US jobs along the way. In February 2017, Howard sold Vascular Solutions to Teleflex for $1 billion. Okay. Mr. Root's and Vascular Solutions story is one of federal regulatory and legal quagmire that led to a 5-year legal battle requiring a defense team of 121 lawyers and resulting in legal fees of over $25 million. Rather than having me provide the details of the story, I'll just share a quote with you from an email that a juror sent to Mr. Root after the trial was over. Quote, "What the federal government did to you, your company, and your employees is nothing short of criminal." With that, I hand over the stage to Mr. Root.
Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for this opportunity. Before I get started, I just want to know how many people are in my club, because you got the Barstool Club. This is the Indicted Federal Felon Club. So everyone who's been indicted on felony charges by federal prosecutors, raise your hand and wave them high. Okay, all right, we got one. I'll buy you a beer afterwards. So for people who've gone through this is an experience that just wakes you up. But unfortunately, not a lot of people hear about these kind of stories. I mean, maybe some of you have seen the Duke Lacrosse case. There's a ESPN thing on that, or Making a Murderer, if you saw something like that, or maybe you know some people who've gotten crossways with the law. But for me, as a business person, as an Eagle Scout, as a Sunday school teacher, I just thought this happened to other people. I never paid attention. And then when it happens to you, you think this is such an unusual event that it couldn't happen to anyone else. And then you just ignore it, and it keeps getting to be a bigger problem. So as I get started, I want to put it in perspective and let you know that this is not a new problem. This is not something that just happened to me. This isn't just something that happened in the last 8 years. This has been around a long time. In fact, if you go back to 1940, the U.S. Attorney General was Robert H. Jackson. He later on became a Supreme Court Justice. And he became Attorney General. He called all the U.S. attorneys together in D.C., and he gave them a speech called the Federal Prosecutor. And he said this to the assembled mass of U.S. attorneys. He said, "The prosecutor has more control over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America. A prosecutor can destroy anyone they choose to destroy in America. A police officer has to answer quickly to someone else in the courthouse or in the jail. A prosecutor doesn't have to answer to anyone until someone can be literally destroyed." He continued, "A prosecutor stands a fair chance of finding at least a technical violation of some act on the part of almost anyone in America." Now, this is 1940. We've had explosion of laws since then. But even in 1940, the U.S. Attorney General is saying everyone in America is a felon in the eyes of some federal prosecutor. And then he concluded and put it all together and said this: "Therein is the most dangerous power of the prosecutor, that he will pick people that he thinks he should get, rather than pick cases that need to get prosecuted." And that's the difference between criminalization, which is finding someone you don't like and trying to put them in prison, and criminal enforcement, where you have a crime and you go and try to find out who did that crime and put that person in prison. And what I'm talking about here is a case of criminalization, where the federal government and the federal prosecutors go after someone, because they don't like them and they want to put them in prison. So let me give you the background of my story, and I'll start way back in 1960, before any of you guys were born. I was born in Minneapolis, and I think from that picture I can say I was a pretty cute little kid. 1970s, my parents moved over to a suburban high school, where you can see that's what we looked like in suburban Minnesota in the 1970s. From high school, I went to the University of Minnesota, both for college. I was an econ major in college, and then went on to law school, where I have to confess I committed a crime in college and law school, because in Minnesota, that right there is felony hockey hair. That's what they call that. I graduated from law school, and I wanted to get a job as a corporate lawyer, so I took a job at Dorsey & Whitney, a law firm in Minneapolis, where you all know what I had to do. I sold out, and I cut my hair. And then I worked for 5 years as a lawyer, and after that I decided I really wanted to work in a corporation. I wanted to be part of the team building something rather than a lawyer just billing by the hour. So the first client that offered me a job was a medical device company in Minnesota. I became their general counsel, and in the 1990s, from 90 to 97, what I did is learned everything I could about medical devices. I knew the law side, but I needed to know how they were manufactured, how they were sold, how they were regulated, everything, so that eventually I could become a medical device entrepreneur. And in 1997, I thought I had everything I needed in this. So I started my company called Vascular Solutions. And I did. I had perfectly everything I needed except two small little details. I had no medical device and I had no money. But other than that, I was perfectly suited for starting a medical device company. Well, to find a medical device, what I did is I found a doctor out here in California who had the idea for what we called the Duet, which is a two-component system to seal the puncture that a cardiologist uses to create an opening in an artery to put a stent in the coronary artery. So that was the idea. I licensed that in. And then for the money, I raised $1.5 million from people I knew in the community, not my own money, but other people I'd worked with as a corporate securities lawyer, hired about 7 or 8 of my friends. We got a small warehouse place, and we started Vascular Solutions in February of 1997. I'll go over the next 15 years' history of the company by charting the stock price against the timeline on this chart. The $1.5 million, all that did was really finance our first year of operation. It wasn't enough to get this medical device on the market. So over the next 2 years, I raised $24 million in venture capital to really get the product through the FDA approval process so we could start selling it. By 2000, we had completed our regulatory approval. We were starting to sell our product. We were creating a nationwide direct sales force across the country of at least 50 people. And so I raised $48 million in our initial public offering, became a public company. First 6 months as a public company, the stock market exploded like it's done the last year. Stock price went up over $20. Our first quarter out was very good, very strong. Everyone was excited. And then all of a sudden one day, a new competitor entered the market, changed their product a bit, and took 85% share of the market I was going after. So I was selling $12 million of product, losing $15 million a year, and I had about 3 years worth of cash left. There was no way we could change the product, so I went back to the board and I said, we got to change the strategy. From one product, we're going to go to multiple products. We'll develop them, we don't know what they are, but we'll use the money we have to try to do something new rather than trying to force this one product through that opening. The board agreed, voted, approved it, and I communicated it to Wall Street, and Wall Street took my stock price down 70 cents. Not by 70 cents, down to 70 cents. We kept the core group of people together at Vascular Solutions, and we started developing our own new devices. By 2004, we had launched 3 of those products. Our stock rebounded to $6. Over the next 3 years, we launched 5 new products each year. Stock stayed flat because we were still losing money. By 2009, people started taking interest, and by 2011, we had launched over 50 new medical devices. We had over $50 million in revenue, and we had become profitable. And that is when my real troubles began. You see, I was at the Minneapolis airport flying out to Boston to talk to some investors right before the 4th of July weekend. And I'm doing what I always do at the Minneapolis airport. I'm getting an ice cream cone at Ben & Jerry's. And all of a sudden, my assistant calls and says, Howard, we just received a subpoena. I said, well, that's not unusual. Sometimes there's collection matters and whatnot. You know, where's the subpoena from? He said, well, it's from San Antonio. I said, well, that's kind of strange. I mean, who's the subject of the subpoena? They said, well, it's Vascular Solutions, and it's you. I said, well, that's really unusual. Well, the real unusual thing, she said, is that this is from the United States of America, from the Department of Justice, from the U.S. Attorney in San Antonio, sent me a subpoena investigating federal health care offenses. This is a criminal subpoena where they're investigating me and my company for criminal activity. First I ever heard about it. So I got on the plane, I flew out to Boston, and I came back, and I spent the 4th of July weekend trying to figure out what this is all about. You see, at that time, we had over 50 medical devices on the market, starting with the Duet in 2000, the 3 new products in 2003, and about 45 more products throughout the next 7 years. This subpoena was solely related to one product called Verilase, which is a treatment using laser energy to treat varicose veins, Verilase laser energy varicose veins. Now, we sold a lot of different versions of this Verilase product, everything from 100 centimeters long down to 5 centimeters long. This subpoena was solely related to one size, the 10 centimeter size that we called the short kit. The reason we had so many different sizes of the Verilase product is because there are a lot of different varicose veins that can be treated. Everything from the great saphenous vein, which is most commonly treated, goes all the way down the leg. The short saphenous vein, a shorter vein down in the calf, ones higher up in the thigh area, and then a series of veins over the anterior side. This subpoena, though, was solely related to the use of the short kit to treat one group of veins called perforator veins. Now, as I dug into it, I knew we had FDA clearance to sell this product. So this wasn't the thing where we're selling a product in violation of the law. The first FDA clearance for the Verilase product came in 2003, and we had 7 additional FDA clearances over the next 5 years, 8 total separate clearances from the FDA. So why do we have so many clearances from the FDA for one product? Why wouldn't one approval be enough? Well, in medical devices, it's a little bit different. You don't just get approval for a medical device, you get approval for a medical device to be used for an intended use. The legal requirement is that you have to have an intended use to provide a general description of the disease the device will treat. In this case, it would be varicose veins. But on top of the legal requirement, in our world, we also have FDA non-binding guidance. So the FDA tells us what they want us to do. And in medical device land, if the FDA says they want us to do something, we say yes, sir, as well as anyone else, because they could inspect us, they could shut us down, there's a lot of things they could do. And in this area, they have this flow chart that says, if you want to make any change to your product that affects the indications for use by adding a word, in every case, they want you to do a new FDA filing. So that's why we filed so many. Now, the FDA approved indications for use at the time I got the subpoena said this: Verilase is indicated for the treatment of varicose veins, which is the general treatment, which is what's required by the law, and varicosity is associated with superficial reflux of the great saphenous vein, more specific, and another one for the treatment of incompetence and reflux of superficial veins in the lower extremity. All of that combined, but it doesn't say anywhere perforator veins. So we had done a 9th filing with the FDA, and this 9th filing was back in 2007, where we wanted them to clarify the indications for use through adding short saphenous vein and perforator and tributary veins into that indication for use statement. This one, unlike the 8 previous ones that had been approved, was rejected by the FDA, saying they demanded that we do clinical data to get this specific indication. Well, we never got that, so we never did that, so I told the sales reps in a written document on the instructions exactly what the FDA wanted us to tell them. We said this: do not indicate that the short kit is approved to treat perforator veins. The short kit is not specifically approved for treating perforators. In medical device land, the product can be sold, it's approved, it can be used by the doctor for anything, but we're telling the sales reps, don't talk about perforator veins with the doctor, just to stay on the good side of the FDA. And I know that my sales reps complied with that instruction because total sales of the short kit for the 5 years it was on the market was $500,000. Sales of all of our other products during the same 5 years were $474 million, which means the short kit made up 0.1% of our sales. 2/3 of my sales reps sold perfectly zero, and there was never even an allegation that any patient had ever been harmed by this product. The most insignificant product we sold, and this was the subject of a criminal investigation. So why was it? Well, there's always a but. And the but in this case was, I realized, I had 2 out of my 100 sales reps gone rogue. They had done something I told them not to do. See, Danny McGiff was our sales rep in Utah, and Kip Thino was his regional manager here in California. And these guys, along with 6 other people in the West region, got together twice each year for a regional sales meeting. This one in April of 2008 was held at a Holiday Inn in Burbank, California. Now, I submit to you, nothing good has ever happened in a Holiday Inn in Burbank, California. And nothing good happened this day. You see, Danny used to work in his father's vein clinic. His father was a vascular surgeon who treated varicose veins, and he used laser energy on perforator veins. So Kip said, hey, Danny, get up and talk about how you would treat perforator veins using laser energy. And Danny did just that. giving out two documents called Tips for Treating Perforator Veins and Treating Perforator Veins an Easier Way. And these are the two documents that the U.S. Attorney attached to that subpoena, claiming that there was some nationwide conspiracy to sell the short kit off-label for treating perforator veins. Well, you might be thinking, how did the DOJ get these documents? They're not staking out the Holiday Inn in Burbank. Well, they got them the same way they always get things to start these types of lawsuits. There's a disgruntled former employee, a whistleblower, if you will. DeSalle Bowie was one of our sales reps in Phoenix. He applied to become a manager. We did not give him the promotion. He quit. He started competing with us. We sent him a letter. He went to a lawyer, and his life was crumbling down. He was bankrupt. There was allegations of child abuse. He was going through a divorce. And he went to the lawyer and said, "What can I do?" And the lawyer said, "DeSalle, I've got a great answer for you. What I want you to do is come up with an allegation that your prior company, Vascular Solutions, has done something nefarious, has done some illegal conduct. We'll put that into a qui tam lawsuit, which is filing a complaint in the name of the government, and file it with the U.S. Attorney. And if the U.S. Attorney picks it up, you will get 25% of whatever money the government recovers. All you have to do is make an allegation, have the U.S. Attorney take it, and we won't have to do a day's worth of work, and you will get 25%. So that's what they did. They came up with an action to recover treble damages and civil penalties on behalf of the U.S., claiming there were damages of approximately $20 million for a product that we sold grand total sales were $500,000. This is the document that the U.S. attorneys started with. This is the way they got their complaint beginning. But you might be wondering, the subpoena was a criminal subpoena, and this lawsuit was a civil lawsuit. DeSalle started his lawsuit for money, not a criminal one, and the criminal subpoena is what came first. How did that get connected? Well, I found out a few years later that the Department of Justice has a policy written in something called the Yates Memo, written by Sally Yates when she was Deputy Attorney General. In it, it instructs the U.S. attorneys that if civil attorneys believe that an individual identified in the course of their corporate investigation should be subject to a criminal inquiry, that matter should promptly be referred to criminal prosecutors. So the civil attorneys in San Antonio got a copy of DeSalle's complaint, went across the hallway, gave it to the criminal counterparts, and the criminal counterparts started the investigation and sent out that subpoena. All right, well, once I realized what this is all about, I did what everyone does in business when you get an allegation of some kind of activity or some kind of litigation, or in this case, a criminal allegation. We send out a memo to every single employee called a litigation hold memo. It means hold all your documents. Don't destroy everything. And this memo said, we instruct all our employees to preserve all documents that concern the use of Verlai's products for the treatment of perforator veins. And one of the employees that got that was Danny McGiff. Danny was the one who created those two documents and given it out at that Western Regional Sales meeting. And then Danny did what a lot of people do when they know they got caught doing something they shouldn't have done. Because Danny knew I told him not to do that. He did it, and now he's going to be in trouble. And what Danny did was he destroyed the documents on his computer. And then he compounded that by lying about it to our lawyer 4 times. And the 5th time, he finally confessed to what he had done, and I had no choice but to fire Danny. Not for giving out those documents, but for lying about it and destroying it. I had no choice. And then I had to tell the U.S. attorney in San Antonio what had happened. And I said, we gave them the documents, we had the documents, there was no obstruction of justice, but Danny had done something that was not right, and we told the U.S. attorneys. And that's exactly where they started their interview. That's where they start their investigation. They called Danny down to San Antonio, and they started asking him questions. Now, we know what those questions are because in our case, it went all the way through trial. So Danny took the stand and was sworn to give testimony about how it went between him and the prosecutors when they were discussing what was going on in Vascular Solutions. Here's the testimony, the transcript from the court. Our attorneys asked Danny, okay, and the government told you you can sign on the dotted line here, which means admit that the company was engaged in criminal activity, or you could face a potential obstruction of justice charge with a 20-year max sentence in prison for destroying those 2 documents. His answer, that is correct. All you have to do is testify against the company and against Howard Root. Those are the choices that were given to you, right? Not testify truthfully, he had to testify against. That was the agreement. Yeah, okay. Pretty easy choice, wasn't it, Mr. McGiff? Answer, yes, it was. And with that, who would withstand the power of federal prosecutors? On one hand, he's going to go to trial, get destroyed financially, and probably go to prison for 10 years. On the other hand, what he's going to have to do is sign a document, get immunity, and he'll be free and clear. So with that, Danny signed a guilty plea that the corporation had been engaged in criminal misbranding, tying the corporation to the act, not himself. The prosecutors then took that and found our other former employees to do more investigations with them. Deborah Schmaltz was our VP of Regulatory. She got called in to be interviewed by the prosecutors, and she communicated this to me of what went on in that interview. I was given a half glass of water and no food and was interrogated for 6 hours. A couple times during the process, I requested to seek counsel from my attorney, and the prosecutor got mad each time I made the request. Then they turned to our current employees. Carrie Powers was our vice president of marketing. They called her down to San Antonio, and here's what she testified on the stand of how the interview with prosecutors went. The prosecutor, Mr. Paulson, got extremely upset and said that if I did not start cooperating, he would recommend that I would lose my career and would never work in healthcare ever again. Well, you might be wondering, how can prosecutors destroy someone's career? In healthcare, it's very easy. One word, it's called exclusion. If prosecutors go to the Department of Health and Human Services and say that Carrie Powers had been engaged in fraud, HHS will exclude Carrie from working with any institution that takes a federal health care payment, Medicare or Medicaid, which is every hospital in America. So she can't work for a medical device company or as a nurse, which she did before she joined us, anywhere in America. One word, she gets excluded, her career is over. The prosecutors then started a grand jury proceeding, and the first employee of ours that went down to a grand jury proceeding was Glenn Holden. And here is where a perjury trap happens. What prosecutors want to do is get someone to say something that's not true so they can accuse them of perjury in order to get the testimony they want to make their case to someone else. So here's how it went with Glenn Holden. They asked him the question. So is the answer to my question a no then? You weren't trying to increase business by selling the short kit for perforators? His answer, no. I would say I'm trying to help the patient population. That's first and foremost. That's my job. Here's what an assistant U.S. attorney said about Glenn's testimony. Glenn is a poor effer, using the actual word, who needs to return to San Antonio on bended knee to fix his testimony. Glenn refused to do that, and as a result, he was indicted on federal perjury charges, scheduled to stand trial 1 month after my case. A lot of the things that happened, I didn't find out about because our employees didn't come back and tell me what the prosecutors had said to them. Some of it I found out about afterwards, some of it I'll never find out about. Beth Matthews was a regional manager for the Great Lakes area, and she sent me an email one day after the verdict came in, when all of this could become public. In it, she talked about what the prosecutors did to her. She said, "The prosecutor said, if you do not deliver us with the answers we want to hear today, it should be made known that we have the power to withhold rights and privileges provided to your natural-born son." Now let that sink in. Remember, this is a case involving a product that had been cleared by the FDA 8 times, made up 0.1% of our sales, and never harmed a single patient, and they're investigating whether the sales rep said the word perforator to a doctor who could use the product for anything they wanted to use it on. And for that case, the prosecutors are threatening not only the freedom, but the career and the children of my employees to get the testimony that they want to try to convict me. Well, you're saying, why don't we just settle? Why don't we just pay them the money and go away, and this whole thing wouldn't have happened? That's the way it used to be back in the 70s and 80s. That's not the way it is anymore. Here's the settlement offer that the prosecutor floated to us before indictment. Vascular Solutions must agree to pay a 7-figure fine. Okay, no one talks in that language. Call it $10 million. I had $40 million in the bank. I will pay you $10 million to not be indicted every single day. That's fine. I'll pay the money if that's it. But there's more. Vascular Solutions must agree to remediation. Well, what does that mean? They specified. Vascular Solutions must agree to terminate me, Glenn Holden, and Beth Matthews, and discipline Shane Carlson, Carrie Powers, and Susan Christian. We had to throw employees under the bus. On top of that, I had to plead guilty to misdemeanor misbranding, a crime which would effectively end my career in healthcare forever. And on top of that, they said this: you can go over our heads to our superiors, but your pleas would fall on deaf ears and will be a total waste of time, as the push to charge Howard is coming from above. Well, we thought these were just 2 prosecutors too big for their britches. They're just making allegations that won't stand up. So we thought we could get someone involved here that would actually help us. And I knew some people from back in 1986 that I thought could be helpful in me to get this addressed. My roommate back then, coming out of law school, is now, up until a month ago, was the U.S. Attorney in Minnesota, Greg Brooker, and here's a picture of him at that party that I had back in 1986. My coworker at the time is now U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, and here's a picture of Amy at that same party. And just so you know that I'm not picking on them for their dance moves or for their fashion sense, here's a picture of future CEO Howard Root at the same party. So I wasn't going to be able to go to Greg and get him involved because this is down in San Antonio. It's outside his purview. But I knew that I could appeal to Maine Justice. That's Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. And at this time, I had hired a high-powered law firm named King & Spalding, whose office is right across the street from the White House. And the main guy on our case was the former head of the criminal division of the Department of Justice. So he put together an appeal letter on the prosecution of me and the company and was going to send it in to Maine Justice. But before he did that, they do what they call a courtesy call. So you call the prosecutors and you say, we're going to send this in just to let you know it's going in right at the time it's going in so you don't get surprised by that. The prosecutor said something to my lawyer, who used to run the whole criminal division, that surprised him. And then they took what the prosecutor said and put it in the letter. Here's what the prosecutor had said. The prosecutor admonished that we would not look positively on the submission of this appeal letter, and you should think about that. He concluded by warning that we did something for you with the understanding that you wouldn't do this. Send the letter if you want, but if you do, it will be a mistake. Now, this is a letter requesting an appeal of a decision to prosecute me and Vascular Solutions. And they're saying, the prosecutors are saying, if you do that, we will punish you. Completely inappropriate. Well, we got 1 hour meeting with Maine Justice, and after that, the response came back in an email from Bud Paulson, the San Antonio prosecutor, who said, I understand that defense lawyers reached out to John Olin. I have been authorized by Consumer Protection Division to be the point of contact on this matter. Maine Justice was not going to get involved. They're going to throw it back down to the guys in San Antonio. Well, I thought I could appeal to Senator Klobuchar because she's someone who might get involved and ask some questions of what's going on. So I sent an email to her chief of staff, and I said, over the last 4 years, Vascular Solutions has been complying with the Department of Justice investigation. Thank you for whatever assistance Senator Klobuchar can provide. The response came back an hour later. Chief of staff said, it has been a long-standing rule of the Senate that senators cannot get involved in ongoing investigations at the DOJ, but thank you for letting us know. That statement is 100% positively false. And the way I know that is my lawyers used to work in DOJ, and they got inquiries from senators all the time. But this is a way for a politician to say, I can't, rather than I won't. And when someone's been accused of a crime, a politician, including Amy, wants to stay as far away from that person as possible. Well, I didn't take that no for an answer, so I made a second appeal some months later. And I said this to her chief of staff. Since Senator Klobuchar is on the Senate Judiciary Committee and a former prosecutor, I thought she should be informed about what is going on within the Department of Justice that affects our Minnesota medical device company. The response came back an hour later. Thanks for reaching out. I'll be sure to pass this along. Have a great day. Now, the chief of staff is a young person, doesn't know my situation, is not trained in law, did not mean anything by that. But you want to talk about a great day. Imagine getting up in the morning and going out to the driveway and getting the paper, the only newspaper you've ever known since you were a child. Everyone that you know, your grade school friends, high school, college, law school, coworkers are going to see the same paper you do, and the lead story, front page, not business section, main story, MedTech CEO accused of conspiracy. And the story is going to be how bad you are and how much fraud you committed, and there's not a thing you can say about it because your lawyer would strangle you if you try to defend yourself in the press. Well, why are the stories so bad when someone gets indicted? Well, the Department of Justice has a habit of giving pretrial publicity. In my case, here's what they said about me. This was a deceptive sales campaign led by the CEO of a public company, said someone who's never met me and doesn't know the company. This is a deceptive sales campaign led by the CEO who said, don't do what they're accusing us of doing. Another assistant attorney general said, Vascular Solutions was a company that put profits over patient safety for a product that made up 0.1% of our sales and never harmed a single patient. A U.S. attorney in San Antonio who wasn't involved with the case said, Vascular Solutions knowingly promoted medical devices for unapproved uses, when we always had all the approvals, 8 separate approvals that the FDA required by law. We were talking about guidance. And then the last paragraph, they say, an indictment is merely an allegation and every defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which never gets reported and never gets read and is completely ignored. Well, once you get indicted, you got another person involved. You got a judge. So finally, you go with someone over the prosecuting team to try to get this thing taken care of. So Fred Beery was the judge down in San Antonio, and we brought a motion to dismiss my indictment for prosecutorial misconduct. We added this into the motion. When witnesses contradicted the prosecution theory, the civil division attorneys went so far as to recite lengthy secret grand jury excerpts in his own version of the facts and to demand that the witnesses recant their prior testimony. Now that's something prosecutors are not supposed to do. Grand jury testimony is secret. They took it, they read it to someone and said, your testimony has to match that. The response to our motion was denied. It came back with these statements. The court finds that this matter does not require a hearing. The judge didn't even want to take facts in these allegations. The record does not demonstrate that the attorneys for the government forced any witness to lie. Well, forced at gunpoint, no, but certainly encouraged on grounds of perjury if you didn't. And then he concluded with this. Even if this court found the defendant's allegations of misconduct to be true and conclusively proven, the remedy would not be dismissal of the indictment. So the judge is not going to get involved to dismiss an indictment before a trial, and you're going to have to go to trial. That trial begins 15 months later. So for 15 months, you're under the cloud of an indictment, trying to run your company, keep your employees, keep your customers, while you have been indicted on felony charges that could put you in prison for up to 10 years. And then after 15 months, you go to San Antonio in the courthouse, and you see this prosecutor who's been after you for a number of years, and he's getting up to give you his opening statement. You want to jump across there and strangle the guy, but you control yourself and you grab the chair and you start listening to him talk. He says, the defendants sold a medical device that they knew, based on their own testing, could cause deep vein thrombosis. Well, you can kind of see where he's going here. Nobody knows what deep vein thrombosis is, but it sounds scary. So obviously he's putting that in the back of the mind of the jury. He continues, and we want to be very clear about something. We have no evidence, and we'll show you no evidence, it's a big wind-up, here it comes, that anybody died from using this device. Well, that's not so bad. That's actually pretty good, right? It got worse from there. He called only one physician who had ever used the product, Dr. Duncan Belcher, a Yale-trained interventional radiologist. This is the prosecution's witness. On cross-examination, Dr. Belcher testified that he's used Verilase for 11 years with nothing but good outcomes. Verilase is safe and effective, and deep vein thrombosis risk, completely hypothetical and never seen. Their own witness destroyed their theory. Then they called one witness on the FDA issues. This is Neil Ogden, the FDA's branch chief in this whole area, and we got to cross-examine Neil Ogden. We asked him, the clearance refers to varicose veins, correct? Yes. Perforator veins can be varicose, correct? Yes. And this clearance has been in place since March of 2008, correct? And then he adds, Neil Ogden adds, jumps in, but nowhere in the indication for use does it say perforator or tributary veins. Well, our lawyer gets a chance to start asking some more questions. You'd agree with me that perforator and tributary veins can be varicose, right, Mr. Ogden? Yes. And the clearance says varicose veins, correct? His answer, correct. Then he does the same thing. He starts volunteering information, and Neil Ogden says, but if the company wanted to say perforator veins, they could put it in their indication for use, our lawyer, and that would be a specific indication, correct? Yes. And FDA, that's under FDA's guidance, correct? Yes. It's FDA's guidance that says you should list specific indications that you want, correct? Yes? Okay. And the guidance is not the law, correct? Correct. Now, I still remember that testimony because I thought we should just take the mic, drop it, and walk out of the courtroom. They were prosecuting me for a crime of a sales rep violating a non-binding FDA guidance document that their own expert witness is saying is not illegal. Well, the obvious question is, how did the prosecutors get it so wrong? Their whole case blew up in the courtroom. The beautiful thing about our case is the prosecutors called as a last witness the investigator who had started on this case and worked for 5 years gathering the evidence, George Skavdis. And George Skavdis took the stand and we got to cross-examine him, and we asked him the obvious question. You didn't think it was important to actually put in front of the witness the words of what the FDA has actually cleared and walked through her understanding? His answer, when I'm interviewing these people, I'm not there to make the defense's arguments. Agent Skavdis, you're a federal law enforcement officer, isn't that right? I am. Your job is to find the truth and the whole truth, is it not? His answer, I'm a fact finder. Now, there is a big difference between truth and facts. Truth is absolute. Truth, you check your assumptions. Truth, you look at what the other side is saying. But with facts, all you're interested in is what facts do you want to find. So we asked Mr. Skavdis, what facts was he trying to find? And he answered this way. That's one of the first things that we look for in my squad, is we're a small squad, and the cases that we want to invest our time and resources in are cases in which the conduct is top-down and wide-ranging. Not the worst offenders, not the most harmed patients, not the one that killed people, top-down and wide-ranging. They wanted to find a CEO in charge of a nationwide sales force that they could go after, and I was blessed to be the guy that they went after. This was not criminal enforcement, this was criminalization. This is trying to find a criminal that you could make in the CEO ranks. Well, why would he do this? Why are prosecutors doing this? They don't get paid for this. They don't get paid based on how many people go to prison. So why are they doing it? Well, the wonderful thing about our case is there was a compliance conference after I'd gotten indicted and before the trial began. Julie Tatesman is both a lawyer and a doctor, so double trouble in our world. She's also an HHS chief medical officer, and she was asked about this case and what was going on. My compliance officer was in the audience and sent me an email reporting Ms. Tatesman's comments. Tatesman said, "Most of you are probably aware of the actions, or as I like to call it, mischief, going on in the Second Circuit, one of the appeal courts up in New York. I'm not going to go into detail on those shenanigans." Now, she's referring to court opinions that went against the Department of Justice. She's upset about it and calls it shenanigans and mischief. No respect at all for what the court is saying. She continued, "I do encourage you all to pay close attention to U.S. versus Vascular Solutions. The government chose this case. The government went on the offensive." So the motivation is this. They lost a couple of cases against other medical device companies. They tried to find a CEO with a nationwide sales force that they could allege it committed something. That was me, and they went on the offensive to try to put me in prison. Well, if Skavdis tried to find those facts, there had to be other facts that he tried to ignore. And there are facts he ignored, facts that a crime was occurring during this case. We asked him on cross-examination. Another thing that you did not write down was that the prosecutor actually read excerpts of grand jury testimony from other witnesses to Ms. Matthews. His answer, that's correct. Now, your understanding is that these grand jury transcripts are supposed to be secret. Isn't that right? That's correct. And then you talked about recommending to Vascular Solutions that she be fired, right, if she didn't fix her testimony? That's correct. Now, that's felony obstruction of justice. You can't disclose secret grand jury transcripts, and you certainly can't tell a witness they have to change their testimony based on what someone else testified. That's exactly what the prosecutors did. Mr. Skavdis not only did not investigate that, he didn't even write it down because it wasn't the facts he wanted to find. With all the clinical stuff thrown out, this product was safe and effective, and all the sales kind of kicked out, and all the harm kicked out, prosecutors had one last emotional appeal to the jury. And they pounded on this throughout the trial. In the opening statement, they said this: "When you hear the evidence, you'll know it's about money." Closing statement: "This is a for-profit corporation. This is about earning money." Closing rebuttal: "Why? You know why. For money." It got worse than that when the fixation for money came out on examination of my sales reps. Christina Playton was also one of the assistant U.S. attorneys on the trial team. She was going after one of my sales reps and asked him this question: "Vascular Solutions is not a charity." No, it's a for-profit corporation. That's correct. Vascular Solutions, the defendant, doesn't pay you $191,000 a year to help your friends out, does it? No. Well, then she went one step further and asked this: "But if your folks went out there and were saying to the doc, there's this thing you can do and it'll put a nice car in your garage," implying that the doc is engaged in this money motivation to do this over the objections of the patient. Well, I thought that was oddly specific. So after the trial, they did a little Googling searching, and I tried to find out, who is this Christina Playton? I found out that she's married. Her husband is Dr. Michael Albrecht, engaged in a private practice surgeon, for-profit medicine in San Antonio. Then I looked at what house they live in. They have a nice San Antonio house with the two of them, no children. They have 4 bedrooms, 3.5 custom baths, and a 3-car garage. And the only question is, I don't know how many Mercedes or BMWs they own, but it's certainly more than $191,000 a year, affording that type of house. Well, the conclusion of the prosecutor's case went this way. This is the actual court transcript. The judge said, "The government having rested," which means they're done calling witnesses, "at this time the defendants will have the opportunity to call witnesses. First, I will call Vascular Solutions." Our lawyer, Mr. Posey, said, "Thank you, Your Honor. Vascular Solutions rests, Your Honor," which means the company's not calling any witnesses. The court, "All right, the defendant Root," my lawyer, Mr. Lundquist, "as does Mr. Root. Thank you." The court, "All right, a nice surprise," because we're cutting this short by a month. Juror, "Wow." Now, I've never seen a juror quoted in a transcript before. They're not supposed to talk, but he said something loud enough that the court reporter picked it up. They were happy they were going to be done with this court case earlier, but they also would be able to render judgment in this case. There are some witnesses that we did not call. I wanted to testify. We had a lot of people lined up. I want to give you an example of one witness that's kind of relevant to this whole case that we did not call and what that witness would have testified to. That witness is FDA reviewer Randolph Copeland. We found him, not because of the prosecutors, we found him on our own. We brought him down to San Antonio, and we had him meet with our lawyer in the San Antonio lunchroom of the hotel where we were staying, and he signed an affidavit. His sworn affidavit said this: he was hired at the FDA just 1 month before he picked up our 9th FDA filing, that one that was for adding the word perforator, and the FDA rejected. His immediate prior job was at McDonald's. He was a night manager at the local McDonald's. He had no training in medical devices, no training at all at medicine. He told Agent Skavdis, the investigator, that the FDA laser expert strongly believed that clinical data should not be required, that this thing was already approved, that everything was fine. But that laser expert was overruled by an FDA manager with no laser experience who wanted to see clinical data to support virtually every filing. This was an FDA mess up. That's the entire reason why we didn't get that specific indication. And Mr. Copeland said that to Agent Skavdis, and Agent Skavdis never wrote it down. So we decided to find out what the prosecutors would say about this. And the prosecutors have an obligation to turn over all exonerating evidence to the defendant. So it's called a Brady request, where you ask for everything that exonerates the defendant. And we asked for the Brady request for this information. It came back, the response came back this way. In response to your letter requesting Brady material related to Randolph Copeland, we have been unable to find any. We did not conduct any interview with Mr. Copeland, and they used the scare quotes around the word interview. They continued, Agent Skavdis met with him briefly in November 2014 to inquire about whether he would be willing to participate in an interview. Based on that meeting, it seemed that Mr. Copeland did not have any relevant knowledge. Now, if you meet with someone and you inquire about whether they have any information and you conclude that they do not have any relevant knowledge, I'm not sure how you conclude that's not an interview. But the reason they didn't want to call it an interview is then they didn't have to write it down and they didn't have to tell us, and they could hide the exonerating evidence. We didn't need that evidence. We didn't need to have anyone because the jury had already made up their mind and we could see it. They came back after a short deliberation, not guilty on all counts for me and for the company. Not only that, but right afterwards, I got an email from alternate juror number 1, which you read about or heard about in the introduction, where she said this to me: I turned 52 years old yesterday, and in all my life, I have never feared the government. As a law-abiding, tax-contributing citizen, one should not have to fear our federal government. Unfortunately, I will never feel that way again. What the federal government did to you, your company, and your employees is nothing short of criminal. Now keep in mind, prosecutors pick the charges, the courtroom, the defendant, the timing. They picked all the witnesses. We didn't call a single witness to testify in our defense. And the jury wanted to throw the prosecutors in prison and let me go free. That's how messed up criminal cases can become in America today. My reaction, well, I had a couple of strong thoughts that I hadn't been able to tell up until now. So when I got out of the courtroom, I wrote my own press release. And I did my own legal review because I didn't want to pay any more lawyers. So I did my own press release and I issued it. And I said this: the company and I are vindicated by today's verdict, but outraged by the obscene legal process we were forced to endure. And that's as clean as I can make the language. Then I wanted to go after the prosecutors for prosecuting Glenn Holden, because Glenn Holden's trial on perjury charges was going to be 1 month later. So I said this: it should now be obvious that Glenn Holden's indictment was merely a malicious retribution by misguided prosecutors. And with that, the prosecutors dropped the charges against Glenn because they didn't want to take round 2 against us in a San Antonio courtroom. And then I concluded with the best sentence I've ever written in any press release in my entire life. And after his indictment is dismissed, if the U.S. attorney in San Antonio still wants to prosecute someone for obstruction of justice in this case, in my opinion, he wouldn't even have to leave his own office to find the most suitable person to indict. Now, with all I said about the prosecutors, the one thing they hated the most was I put their names in the press release. Because prosecutors, when they win, want all the glory, and when they lose, they want anonymity. Let's put it in perspective and draw it back to what could happen to you. There are 2 types of punishment that every defendant gets in America today. The first one is punishment by the process. We had to hire 121 lawyers at 14 law firms to represent ourselves in this. Why so many? Well, the prosecutors had brought in over 50 of our employees and customers to be interviewed. Each one of those needed legal representation, and it was in our own best interest to pay for that, so we were all within the same tent. That means that we spent over $25 million in legal expenses over 5 years to defend ourselves against false criminal charges. Not a dime of that gets reimbursed by the federal government. You eat that, you go away, you can't get your money back. If I had been convicted, though, the judge would have taken over, and our judge at trial turned out to be Royce Lamberth, a judge from Washington, D.C., who winters down in San Antonio and was a trial judge for us. Now, Judge Lamberth is notoriously a tough sentencing judge. I asked a former prosecutor if I'd been convicted of the most likely charge, what would I have been sentenced to? And he said, greater than 36 months in prison. Federal charges, you must serve 85% of that time. I would still be in prison today if I had been convicted. If the company had been convicted, Vascular Solutions would have been excluded from selling any of our medical device to any U.S. hospital. Company would have been shut down, employees let go, and the products sold off in a huge garage sale. Well, I asked that same former federal prosecutor, what are the odds of a conviction? How many acquittals, I asked, has Judge Lamberth had in the last 10 years? Full acquittals. Someone walks in, walks out, not guilty, all counts. His answer, 0. I'm the first one in 10 years to go into the courthouse of Judge Royce Lamberth and come out not guilty. That's how stacked the deck is against you in the federal criminal system in America. Today, I would hazard a guess, and not hazard a guess, I would state this unequivocally. Every healthcare CEO is viewed as a criminal by some prosecutor in America today. Why is that? Well, here are the jury instructions that would have put me behind bars. This is what they told the jury they would use to decide whether to convict me. They said, the United States is not required to prove that defendant Root knew about or intended to commit the misbranding violations. Now keep in mind, this is an act that I never did. I wasn't the one selling any products to doctor. I didn't tell our people to do anything. In fact, I told them the opposite. But they're saying beyond that, it's not even something that I had to intend to do or something that I even knew happened. This is a strict liability crime. Knowledge and intent are not required. Instead, this is the standard. You must find beyond a reasonable doubt that by reason of his position in the corporation, he had the responsibility and authority either to prevent or promptly correct the violation, and he failed to do so. Now, I would swear under oath as a CEO, I have the responsibility and authority to prevent and correct every violation in my organization. So the only question is, did a salesperson say the wrong word? If they did, I'm the one who's going to be criminally convicted. I had 100 sales reps. And if you haven't managed 100 sales reps, they're a lot like 100 teenagers. And if a teenager says the wrong word, you go to prison, you're not going to sleep well tonight. Sales reps, the same thing. My case is not the exception. It's not a one-off lightning strike. Acclarent, a medical device company here in the Bay Area, its CEO was indicted and convicted of that very same strict liability crime, and he's still awaiting sentencing a year plus later after the trial is over. Warner Chilcott, its CEO, a drug company, indicted but found not guilty after an 8-week trial. Spectranetics, medical device company in Colorado, CEO was indicted and convicted, not of the crime, but of giving a false statement because it was set up in a perjury trap. 50% of public medical device companies have at least one investigation, all of them potentially criminal. And it's not just medical device companies. FedEx was indicted here in San Francisco a couple of years ago, claiming that they were a drug runner and a money launderer because they picked up packages from internet pharmacies and did not check the prescriptions. That case was thrown out at trial, but it went all the way up through trial before it was dismissed. And beyond that, you do not have to be a CEO to suffer the slings and arrows of federal prosecutors. Look at the Duke lacrosse case. 4 college kids on a lacrosse team, falsely accused of rape, run through the ringer, almost destroyed, and lucky that they were able to get off without having any permanent damage. Or look at the documentary Making a Murderer about Brandon Dassey, a kid, a 16-year-old kid in Wisconsin, accused of murder he couldn't possibly have done and is still in prison for that today. It goes beyond CEOs, it goes beyond business, it goes beyond individuals. It's everyone in America can be prosecuted or persecuted by federal prosecutors. What are the incentives for prosecutors? Well, we talked a little bit about why they went after me, but take a look at the bigger picture of what they're going after and why they're going after it. They do a press release at the end of every year where they talk about the recovery that they've made. The one from the end of 2016 said that they made $4.7 billion in false claim settlements in that year alone. $2.5 billion of that came from healthcare. From healthcare, they've gotten $19 billion since 2009. Recoveries from healthcare companies alone fund the entire operation of the Department of Justice across the country. These whistleblowers and relators, they filed 13.5 cases per week last year, and they received $4 billion as their 25% share. So it's a self-perpetuating, self-financing industry. And healthcare prosecutions, in the DOJ's own words, have returned $6.10 for each dollar invested. They calculate a return on investment in criminally prosecuting people like me. Well, that's the department. How about the individual? From the individual, there's an awards press release that they give out every year. 376 employees were presented with Attorney General awards back in 2016. This is a 23-page press release that refers to these awards as a rare opportunity that's done every year to honor the efforts of outstanding department employees. Do you want to guess how many awards they've ever given for declining to prosecute or for an exoneration? It is 0. It never happens. If you want to move up in the Department of Justice, you get big settlements, you get convictions. That's the way you move ahead. Well, after this is all done, I thought there's got to be a way to correct this. There's got to be someone interested in it. And even though Senator Klobuchar is not going to come to my defense, there are other senators who will. So we had a senator from Iowa, Senator Grassley, send a letter on my behalf to Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, asking for an inquiry about the potential wrongdoing of government attorneys in the Vascular Solutions case, requesting a response by June 2nd. The response came 3 weeks beyond that deadline from the Assistant AG, Peter Kadzik. He said this: the defendants were provided an opportunity to put before the district court all the facts that they claim supported their allegations. The district court considered those facts carefully. In an opinion, the district court addressed each one of the defendant's allegations, rejected each one as unfounded, and denied the defendant's motion. Now that's the motion we brought before the trial when the judge said, I don't want to hear the facts, I don't want to look at this stuff, and even if I considered all of it true, I still would not dismiss the indictment. So at that time it was too early, and now it is too late. So you never get the Department of Justice to look at wrongdoing in their own backyard. Well, we had a DOJ inquiry too. We can do something beyond the Senate. Our lawyers at King and Spalding decided to send something into DOJ to ask for an investigation because they're former federal prosecutors. They were outraged, and they believe that a full and complete investigation by DOJ is warranted in my case. The response came back a year later in this case. OPR, their Office of Professional Responsibility, requested and received detailed written responses to the allegations from the 4 prosecutors. Didn't even interview them, just sent questions and got answers back. OPR concludes that none of your allegations against the 4 department attorneys is likely to lead to a finding that any of them committed professional misconduct, and we've closed our inquiry. So again, DOJ is not going to police their own. How about the public discussion? Since I got done with my case, I wrote a book about it, I go out and I talk about it, like cases like this, and sometimes I get even invited to some of these legal seminars. So there's one called Life Sciences and Healthcare, Quitam and False Claims Summit. There's Department of Justice attorneys, there's defense lawyers there, and they talk about developments in the field. There's another one, the big one every year, is the 27th Annual National Institute on Healthcare Fraud down in Florida, and we were going to be the seminal case that we're going to talk about back in 2008. Both of these invitations were rejected. Why? Well, they told me why. Said, I would love to use you, but I'm afraid that government speakers will not participate. They wouldn't show up if I was on the podium. In the case of the 27th Annual National Institute, if Howard Root is on the agenda, no one from DOJ will participate in your conference. They blackballed me because they don't want to talk about their mistakes. Well, I thought this is good, so I went to my friend, Senator Grassley, and he sent a letter into DOJ on this thing, talking about these exclusions from me speaking at industry conferences by threatening to withhold department participation in the conference. He requested a response by April 8th. The response came back 6 months later, in September, from the Assistant Attorney General and said this: the decision to accept a particular invitation depends on a variety of factors, including yada, 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 the end, whether participation would be in the interests of the department and its mission. What the Department of Justice is saying is, we won't talk where people are going to point out our mistakes. We only want to talk about our victories. So that's their prerogative, and that's what they're going to do. My decision when I realized what all was going on here was pretty simple. I did a press release where I said, while I still love my company 20 years after I started it, I'm not willing to assume much longer the personal risk associated with being the CEO of a public medical device company, and I sold my company to Teleflex and retired at the beginning of last year. My perspective on this whole thing might surprise you, is that I am one of the most fortunate criminal defendants in America. Think about it. I had the $25 million it took to pay my defense team. I had a board of directors that stood behind me. They didn't kick me out of my own company when I got indicted. I got a family that stood with me. I had employees that stood up to the federal prosecutors to the point of being indicted on perjury charges and would not change their testimony to save themselves. How many criminal defendants in America have those advantages? 1 in a million? At least. Maybe even 1 in a billion people like that. I might be the only one. So I wrote an op-ed and got it published in the Minneapolis paper talking about this, where I said that I know that others have suffered far worse at the hands of prosecutors in a culture that accepts and encourages unjust tactics. I also know that I am lucky to be backed by a financially successful company. What happens to those that are less fortunate? Well, since I wrote my book and started talking about it, I get a call probably about once a month or an email from someone who's going through a similar situation. Here's an email that I got a little while ago, and I know it's going to be a bad email when I get a subject line like this: not sure where to turn. And the context of the email was this: my best friend and employer is in the middle of the same type of fight. Everything he's ever worked for is in jeopardy. I can promise you that he's done nothing wrong. My contact information is below. And so I return the call. I call these people because I think it's important for them to know that they can fight the government and win. But then I have to ask them the single most important question before giving them any advice. What do you think that question is? I'm not going to ask them if they did it. I don't want to be a witness at their trial. But beyond that, what's the most important question to determine? Yeah. What's that? How much they have to spend. How much money do you have? Simple as that. If you want justice in America, the number one question you have to answer is, how much money do I have? And if they say they've got $200,000, my advice is plead guilty. Definitely don't pick a fight. Because with $200,000, you cannot fight the federal government. If you don't have at least $1 million you can throw away on this case, you are not going to get the results you want. And the worst part about it all is if you pick a fight and then run out of money, they will beat you even harder. I had one guy who would have gone away with just probation for something that wasn't even a crime, didn't do anything wrong, but he started to fight because he didn't do anything wrong. Then he ran out of money. Then he had to plead guilty, and he spent 1 year in prison because it was later on in the process when he took the offer from the prosecutors. Well, let's do another example of what happens to the less fortunate. I went back in time, because I have some time now that I'm retired, and looked for another case like mine down in San Antonio. And I scoured the records of the San Antonio Express News, where that prosecutor, Bud Paulson, was on the case, and that judge, Fred Beery, was the judge. And I found something back in 2011 with a white-collar criminal defendant. It was a holdout in a criminal case alleging former employees of a company concluded with businessmen to defraud the San Antonio company out of $10 million, and he decided to resolve the matter his way. Now keep in mind, my case was a $20 million fraud. This is only half that. Gary Schwing, 65, took his own life Tuesday, the same day his lawyer conferred by phone with Bud Paulson. A month ago, he had demanded a trial. This was before he went to court, before he got his day in court. Said Assistant U.S. Attorney Bud Paulson, about every 3 or 4 years, somebody who is facing prosecution decides to take what's really a tragic exit. This happens in San Antonio every 3 to 4 years, and Bud Paulson is not apologetic about it. I've met a lot of egotistical doctors in my career. I've met a lot of egotistical hedge fund managers as a CEO of a public company. I've never met a man with an ego that approaches the ego of Bud Paulson, and he is a federal prosecutor. That means with what I've seen is my case has now become my cause. I wrote the book Cardiac Arrest, which details all the facts of my case, going through everything. It is available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible. It gives you a lot of background. If you know anyone going through something similar, I think it's an important lesson as to what they have to stay away from and what they have to expect if they're going to fight the federal government. And my advice to you, because I thought, you guys aren't quite CEOs of public companies yet. Maybe one day you will. But a lot of this carries over beyond my environment. And there's a couple of important takeaways about all this story that I think you need to keep in mind. The first one I realized is that you have the right to remain silent. So talk only with your lawyer. The biggest mistake people make, including CEOs, is when the federal government comes calling, they start talking. And if you do that, you will get accused of perjury. So the first thing you say if you get accused of a crime is, I'm sorry, I would love to talk with you, but I need to speak with my lawyer. And you stick to that, and you say absolutely nothing until your lawyer is there. You have that constitutional right. People throw it away all the time and don't do it. And if you don't agree with that, keep in mind this. I've talked to police officers. Police officers tell their children, do not talk to law enforcement if you are involved in something that could be criminal. Police officers tell their own. I'm sure prosecutors tell their own. Because anytime you start talking, you can get in trouble. The second thing, keep in mind, and this is absolutely true, prosecutors in America are allowed to lie. Never trust what they say. Time and time again, they told my employees things that were completely factually false to see if the employee would parrot those remarks so they could build their case against me and the company. There's no repercussions for that. There's nothing wrong with that in the prosecution system. And people believe that because they are an officer of the court, that they would tell them the truth. That's not the case. The third thing, many indicted people in America are 100% innocent. Act accordingly. When I got indicted, there were a lot of people who shied away from me. There were a lot of people who thought I'd done something wrong. Why would prosecutors in San Antonio go after me if I hadn't done something? Oh, I remember Howard in high school. He always had a loud mouth. He must have shot that mouth out to someone. I did nothing wrong. But it was 2 years until they actually understood that I'd done nothing wrong. People in America are innocent and presumed innocent until they're proven guilty. Yet in the press and in society, we presume they're guilty until they're proven innocent. It needs to go back the other way. And the last one is, when you're out there in the business world or wherever you go, always do the right thing. If I hadn't done the right thing, I would have been convicted. There are a lot of guilty people out there. There are a lot of CEOs of public companies that deserve to go to prison. Do the right thing so that you have the ability to defend yourself. But even if you do the right thing, be prepared to be indicted, because anyone in America can be indicted any single day, a CEO down to a guy just walking down the street. So that's my story, that's my background, that's my advice, and now I'll open it up for questions for you from the audience. Thanks.
Okay, this is on. I'm sorry, I don't see anybody. Okay, here you go.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry about what you went through. Why isn't the media interested in egregious cases such as yours?
That's a great question. So why isn't the media all over this type of stuff? And there are some cases where the media does get involved, but really limited cases like the Duplacross thing after the fact. The media, speak truth to power is the slogan of the media, except the government. They do not. I sat down with a business reporter for the Minneapolis paper before I got indicted and explained to them what this is all about. And no guilty defendant's going to go in there and talk to the newspaper. And still, even with that, his approach was, if you didn't do anything wrong, prosecutors would not have indicted you. They don't understand that people can be indicted for absolutely nothing in America. The old saying is, a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich. Absolutely true. Any of us could be indicted tomorrow. That chair could be indicted tomorrow, because grand juries don't have the ability to get the other side of the evidence. So if you're indicted, the press will think you've done something wrong. There's also, it's obvious that there's an anti-business press out there. There's maybe the Wall Street Journal, which has done a great job following my case and doing a couple things. Maybe there's a couple of other conservative publications out there. But the vast majority, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, a definite bent away from business and toward the government. And so they don't trust us. And, why would they? Now, the other problem is defendants, when you get indicted, cannot speak freely. If you do, your lawyer is going to kill you. So you can give them as much information as you can possibly get out of your lawyer, and that's it. And it doesn't tell the whole story. So they have government attorneys going out there and shooting their mouth off with all these conclusions. They have the defendant saying a little bit of stuff, which sounds like it's a rebuttal, but doesn't give you the whole story. And they trust the government more than they trust business. With that, the stories are going to come anti-defendant every single time.
Yes, we have trial by jury. And so the juries are supposed to be, your peers and be able to judge the facts and say you're not guilty, if you really aren't. So why is the jury system not working the way it's supposed to?
Right.
And what kind of legal reforms would you propose?
So, that's a great question, too. And I have a completely different take on that. The jury is our last defender of freedom. I always say that I'm the greatest demotivational speaker in America. It's not a big market for that. No one wants to be demotivated, but it is. I want to give you a motivational thing. The jury showed me the faith in average citizens. So we had done mock trials where you pull people in from that community and you try to figure out who's going to be to you or away from you. And I thought, well, this is all fake. You pay them, a couple $100 and they're there for a weekend. They're not going to take this seriously. The mock trials we had down in San Antonio, very serious. They took everything and they analyzed it and they spent more time on it. And I got to observe them from behind one-way glass as they're talking about me and the charges. And then I got to kind of figure out what groups of people were for us and against us. And something I'd never thought about before, who would believe the government over a business person? I'm from Minnesota, down in San Antonio. Is an older African-American guy going to want to have any sympathy for me? Is he going to just, because I'm a multimillionaire, want to throw me in prison? Is a suburban housewife going to be on my side or against me? And it was just shocking to me, because the number one group that was on my side, and we had 3 different focus groups. We had about 100, so we had about 10 of these people in this category. It was older, male, African Americans. They would not convict me. They would have to see blood on my hands to put me in behind. And they were adamant that they're not going to let the government get me, because we showed them just a hint of what the prosecutors did to my employees, and they went ballistic because they said, I've seen it before. It's the same old crap. They do that to me all the time, my brother, my cousin, my father, or everything, and I'm not going to let them do it to this guy. And it's like, wow, that really restores my faith. Now, let's flip it. The worst group, the group that wanted to put me in prison just because I walked in there with unshined shoes, was middle-aged women, Caucasians. Suburban housewives were a really bad group for me, because they're saying, that's what the rules are. The FDA says you should do that. That's what it should be. You're the same as everyone else. I don't want to be accused of playing favorites with you, so you're going to have to suffer the consequences. And they were adamant about that. So, in the jury system, the defendant has a big advantage. The defendant gets to exclude more potential jurors than the prosecutors do. We, because of my money, were able to do 3 mock trials to decide who to pick. And we picked a jury where I had 5 people on there that I knew were not going to convict me of anything. Now, I couldn't get to 12, so they had to convince the other ones through a little arm twisting. But the prosecutors aren't going to save you. The prosecutors' bosses are not going to save you. I found out that the judges, by and large, almost all of them, will not save you. The only saving grace in America is the jury. And that's the way you need to play. So when I advise people, there's 3 cases in Minnesota going on with defendants where I'm trying to help them get through it. And I say, focus all your attention on the jury. Don't focus your attention on the judge. Don't make all these long-winded motions, because the judge is going to reject them. But focus on how you're going to persuade the jury that you're a good person. And the absolute number one thing that you need to do, if you're going to convince them that one, the one that I didn't do, is you need to testify. The jury wants to see the defendant look at them and say, I did not do anything wrong. I built this company because I wanted to do something right, and that's the way I run it. Now, my wife was really pissed at me when I wasn't going to testify. And if it had gone the other way, I would have regretted that decision. But we didn't think we needed to extend the trial by a month just to have me get on the stand, and then the prosecutors take their best shots at you. But the jury is right. Now, changing the system, that requires something different. There's an easy change to this. New Attorney General who changes house at the Department of Justice, who goes back to what Robert H. Jackson said in 1940 and said, the objective of the Department of Justice is not prosecutions, it's justice. And an innocent man going free is as valuable as a guilty man going to prison. And if you do something wrong, we're going to hold you responsible, and we're going to make a public spectacle of you. Be on notice. Prosecutors have ungodly powers in this country. They always will. But if you do something wrong, you will be held accountable. And if they did that, all of a sudden prosecution would go back to what it should be, which is getting the people who are bad. We have enough bad people. There's plenty of time to spend on that. Don't pick new people and try to make them bad.
In regards to government prosecutors specifically, how do we start incentivizing finding the truth then rather than just the facts to prosecute people?
3 great questions right in a row. That's wonderful. If I were Attorney General, which obviously will never happen, what would I do? You know those awards that I said, that 23-page press release of all those 350 awards? I'd give 10 awards for an exoneration and 10 awards for declining to prosecute, where they got bad information. And I would put them on stage and I would give them a bonus, and everyone would see that. I did that at the medical device company. I had a compliance award for our sales force, something that someone had done that prevented a problem. It didn't make us any money. It wasn't anything I told them to do. They took it upon themselves. I found out about it. Their manager reported it in. I gave it a compliance award every time. They should do the same thing in the Department of Justice. Change the culture. Because the problem is, you could say, well, why don't we put limitations on what prosecutors can do? I don't know if there's any way to do that. A prosecutor is going to prosecute. That's what they can do. But they got to prosecute the right people. And so they're instructed on how to do that. They're managed when they're doing that, and then they're punished if they don't do it right. And if you do that, I think we'd make a big change to it.
So I'm going to ask a question, which is, this seems like a money-making operation. I was surprised at how much money the DOJ gets from all of this. And when you say that there are criminals out there, yeah, there's a lot of criminals. They don't have a lot of money. You know, people that have committed crimes and probably should be prosecuted. The ones that have the money are the ones that you can make into criminals,
Right.
criminalize, as you're saying.
Yeah, well, the old story about why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. If the Department of Justice wants to get money, they're not going to go after street thugs. They're going to go after guys like me. Now, that's going to finance it. Also, prosecutors don't want to go after gangs because prosecutors can get killed if gangs go after them. I'm not a guy who's got a gun. I'm not going to go after the prosecutor because you went after me. So they're safer going after me. They're going to get more money by going after me, and they're going to get more rewards going after me. So incentivizes that. Now, I'm not playing the victim card. It's not like because I've got all the money and that trumps anything they're going to do compared to the average Joe down the street. But there's this big money-making incentive, and it comes out in their press release. When the Department of Justice calculates a return on investment in doing criminal prosecutions, that's just so far wrong. I can't even imagine it got through checking. I could make millions and billions of dollars being a prosecutor. $1,000 or I'm going to prosecute you. Okay, $1,000 there, $500 there. I mean, I'll find your hot spot and I'll get money from everyone. And when I'm done, I'll go back around again. You'll have more money. I'll keep taking it. So with prosecuting power being unlimited, people will pay as much as they can to get out of it. And then what the prosecutors do, they want more and more and more. Now, where they broke down with this problem, they used the power of criminal prosecution to get as much money as they could. But then they got attacked in America that we were getting all this money, but no one was changing their behavior. So then they said, we need money and we compliance agreements. We want compliance agreements so these companies are never going to do this again. And people did that. But then they still got accused of not doing enough because individuals weren't being held responsible. So then the prosecutors said, okay, we want money, we want compliance agreements, and we want to hold individuals responsible. And they thought they could do that, and the problem is that's where business said no. That's where business started to fight. That's the only time any sane person will say no to a prosecutor is if I say yes, I'm going to be destroying someone. Me, my employees, someone's going to get destroyed. If it's just about money, I will give it to you all the time, even if I did nothing wrong. And all of a sudden, the prosecutors started getting beat on. Now, the two prosecutors in my case, combined total of the last 10 years, had 2 trials. You know, they were up there, they were going to give a document to the witness, and one says to the other, Bud, permission to approach the witness? And Bud says, Tim, in the courtroom, we asked the judge that question. You know, this is stuff that was just surreal as you're sitting there. These guys don't know what they're doing, but that's because prosecutors had the power to extract whatever they want because most people can't fight. And now when they're going after people like me who have the money and the will and the desire to fight back, then they lose. So there's some good things of that, because my winning this case means maybe they'll be a little bit more hesitant about taking on the next business person, thinking they can destroy them before they even get to trial.
Any other questions? Well, let's thank our speaker, and he will be joining us at the Barstool meeting at Flames. We're going to head over there. There will be beer and pizza and more conversation, so I hope you all come. You're welcome. Thank you.